We are back on Brew the Blue. Hope everybody's doing well, staying safe, and I'm delighted to say joining me this Thursday for this edition is Dave Prentice, Liverpool Echo Sports Editor, a legend in this part of the world, David, and I think it'd be absolutely fair to say. How are you doing, mate?
Very, very well. I'm not sure I can live up to that kind of billing.
It's probably absolutely fair enough, I'd say, in that regard.
I'll take your word for it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's got to be nice. Got to be nice to everyone who comes on here, gets up at this time to speak to me, Dave. But no, in all seriousness, how are you doing, mate? How are you finding things at the moment?
All right. I mean, like everybody, I think frustrated. Trying to do the job as best we can in very, very difficult circumstances. But there are plus points. Obviously, you get to spend a lot more time at home with my wife and kids. We're actually having proper meal times every single evening now. Which we've not done for a long time, which is great. And other little positive spin-offs. I mean, the start of the year. An idea I've had for a long, long time about doing a book about some of my experiences. Sort of working in journalism for a time where journalism has changed quite dramatically. So not just Merseyside, but the world at large. And started working on this book. Had the guys at our place, as was Trinity Sports Media, obviously the publishing arm of the Echo, were very, very enthusiastic about it and encouraged me to do a version. I think initially it was going to be, basically, Everton, Liverpool and Tranmere, because I've covered all three during my time, but they weren't interested in that. They actually wanted an Everton one, because obviously that's what I'm more closely, sort of aligned to. Obviously I am a Blue, which is why I'm on this. And I think they saw it as being something similar to Brian Reed's, 43 years with the same bird. And so obviously that was music to my ears, wanting to do something just about Everton, alone. So I've been getting really stuck into that. I think they wanted about 80,000 words, ideally by the end of July. I think I'm 75,000 already and flying. So, the extra time I've had on my hands has been quite beneficial in some respects. So, yeah, I've enjoyed that as well. So just trying to do what I can, and long walks, of course.
Yeah.
So going out for a walk every day. Where I live is quite a nice part of the world. So, so fortunate enough to be able to go for a walk down the beach. So I haven't bumped into Carlo yet, though.
I think
one day maybe.
Yeah, I've spoken to a few people who live down that end who've been sort of walking up and down Crosby Beach just trying to catch a glimpse of him and see him counting the Iron Men and that sort of thing, but no sign as of yet. But that's great news on the book, and it's something I've always, whenever we've spoken, and read your pieces for the Echo, I've always thought about why haven't you gone down that route? I mean, has it been an idea that's been rattling around in your head for a while? Or?
Long time, yeah. I mean, a long time ago, I did it was called 10-Year Blues, and to be honest, it was a bit rubbish. It was just a collection of reports that I'd put in the Echo, and I always remember a review from the When Skies Are Grey. One of the guys said, "Yeah, it's all right, but we actually want the stories behind the stories. We want to know how you came across this interview or the relationships with managers and players." And so it made sense. That is far more interesting. And whenever I'm talking at work, I'm one of the elder members of the sports desk now. So whenever I start telling stories, they all love the stories and like, "Oh, you've got to put this in a book. You've got to put it in a book." So I started doing it a long, long time ago. And as ever, time was always the constraint. I just thought I'll never really get around to doing it. I mean, I spoke to Gavin Buckland about his wonderful book he did about Everton in the 60s. I think it took him 7 years to do. And I thought, oh, wow, it's good. I can't really commit to something like that. But start of the year, I just thought, right, I'm going to do it. And I started doing it. And I put together little cameos and little anecdotes going back several years. So I had probably about 10,000 words already in anecdotal form already together. So I started really putting my mind to it and really getting stuck into it at the start of the year. And because it's a project I'm quite passionate about, it's flown, so it's not really a trial. It's something I'm actually enjoying doing. So yeah, it's been flying. So, fingers crossed, July 31st, I'll get the completed manuscript and we'll start putting it together. And it could be in the market in time for Christmas, when hopefully we'll all be out of this nonsense and able to go to shops and buy the thing.
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking forward to that already. It sounds brilliant. And I think the stories behind the stories angle you mentioned there, it's something that I love it when we get to speak and you come on our shows, because some of the stories, in particular about the 94-95 season on that, especially we did with you and Gav recently and Joe Royal, of course, was fantastic. And I suppose if you're looking at the industry now, and I imagine this will be something you'd be looking at, in the book, it's those sorts of things and those sorts of anecdotes are getting less and less, aren't they? Because as you probably know better than anyone, that distance between journalists and the fans and the players is getting wider and wider. And you're not going to have things where you go on pre-season tours. You're not going to have that sort of interaction with the players on a day-to-day basis. So it's great that you'll be able to chronicle that all now.
Totally. I mean, I'm finding that even now. I mean, I'm up to the beginning of the Koeman era, and the stories dry up because, so football now or football journalism is conducted in a very controlled environment. I mean, I understand why. When I first started doing the job, I was invited down to as Belfield once a day, if not twice a day. I'd sit down and have a conversation with the manager. I'd have like 10 or 15 minutes with him. I'd have a cup of tea, a bit of toast. And as a result, you build a relationship with that manager and you can understand what he's trying to achieve at the football club. And in some respects, you become friends. I had a number of players that lived quite close to me who became personal friends and still are now. So, we ended up like going out socially with them. And a bizarre situation when Peter Johnson was the chairman at the time. And remember the very first ground move poll back in about 94, I think it was. And myself and Paul Joyce had to go over to Johnson's house over in the Wirral to get the results of this ground poll move. And woman answered the door, and I just presumed she was Johnson's home help. She had a pinny on, and she looked like she'd been doing a little bit of sort of cleaning or something. Anyway, invited us into the kitchen. Gave me a glass of wine. Kept on looking at me really oddly, during the course of the interview. And eventually she goes, David Prentice, isn't it? The penny dropped. Lorraine Rogers was an old school friend of mine
Oh,
going
yeah.
back a long, long time. Anyway, Johnson was appalled that, so I knew, so this girl who was my age, so he was going out with. So that created a strange dynamic, in my relationship with, so the chairman at the time and his partner. And, ultimately ended up on me spending the night on his yacht in the bloody south of France when I was writing some quite cruel, critical things about him, which were thoroughly justified, by the way.
Yeah.
And she tried to bury the hatchet by inviting me during the World Cup in '98, so onto his yacht. So that's all in there. So yeah, lots and lots of mad little anecdotes. But as you get closer to the modern era, they do tend to dry up a little bit because the change for me affected, apart from my own career, so obviously I became deputy sports editor, then sports editor, so involved far more in the admin side of things than I would be actually writing as I used to. But football clubs themselves, when Everton moved to Finch Farm, I think they saw that as an opportunity to pull the drawbridge back up a little bit, maybe not give us quite the same kind of access that we'd had previously. And they weren't doing it for, so any ulterior motives. They're just the demands on managers, time nowadays are intense.
Yeah.
So it is a very controlled environment. And nowadays, so the Echo, along with all the other members of staff, get the opportunity to go and see the manager in a very controlled, so press conference environment, day before a football game. And we've got to try far harder to actually build the relationships that I was probably, so granted much more easily when I was doing the job. Phil Kirkbride's doing a great job doing it. I mean, he's got very good contacts with Farhad Moshiri, so the manager he's working on at the moment, but he's only new, so it'll come. Marcel Brands, but he's had to work a lot harder on it than maybe I did. But as a result, so I did get a lot of very, very entertaining stories out of the job, which hopefully people enjoy reading.
Yeah, and I suppose it's one of them, isn't it, where it's just the very nature of football now, where you look at Everton in recent years, the turnaround in personnel at the football club has been, in terms of the manager and the players and, even on the board and stuff like that, it's been just a revolving door, hasn't it? So I imagine for people, like you said, like Phil and Adam, who are at the Echo now, for you guys, it must be hard for them to get those regular contacts because they could be in and out the door straight away.
Oh, it's impossible. I mean, Ronald Koeman, I don't think anybody had his number. He was a very, very, should we say, aloof individual anyway, who was, so not wanting to build any relationships with the media, and he mistrusted us basically. But, I don't think anybody actually enjoyed having his, private phone number. Again, I was quite fortunate when I started. There'd been like a precedent set in place by my predecessor, Ken Rogers, who was very close to Howard Kendall, and would go down every single day. And subsequent managers were just happy to continue with that arrangement. I took over in '93 when Howard was on his second spell, and obviously he was more than happy to, to look after the Echo. And then obviously when he went, Mike Walker came in, and an interesting period in the club's history. But he was happy to continue with that arrangement. And then likewise Joe, likewise Walter, David Moyes. David gets this impression about a reputation. I think it's a bit unfair of being quite a dour, sort of cool individual. And okay, he's not exactly the life and soul of a party as, so Howard could be or Joe could be, but it was a very, very straight dealing individual. And I've always said that he was the most honest man I ever dealt with as a manager, just absolutely straight as a die. Would always tell you everything utterly honestly. And the fact that he was there for so long as well, so helped a great deal. So, a fair bit of time for David as well. So yeah, fortunate in many respects. But once he left, that was it then. It became like, mayhem. When Roberto got his 2 or 3 years, and Roberto was a strange character. When you get this very outwardly, apparently very engaging and enthusiastic personality. But there was a slightly darker side to Roberto, as always a lot of people didn't often see.
Mm.
And then when he went, it was like, like you say, it was the roller coaster ride then, sort of new manager every 12 months, which makes it very, very difficult indeed to get to know A, what a manager's tried to do, and B, get to know him particularly well at all. Fortunately, there's a bit more stability now, certainly in the higher echelons of the club. I mean, you've got, sort of a hierarchy that appears to be in place for quite some time to come. And hopefully that will extend to the manager as well, because I think, we all agree that, so Carlo is absolutely the right man for the job. And we hope that he's there for a long, long time to come.
Yeah, I bet your daily briefing room with Carlo would be nice, wouldn't it?
It'd be wonderful
to talk to every day.
It was funny actually, because the first time I got to meet him, Bill had invited us into the boardroom for a game, his first match, and so brought me over to say hello to him. And I was trying to score points as quickly as possible, so I referenced the fact that he made me a very, very happy man way back in 2007 when I was in Athens and the chief sports writer to cover the Champions League final against his Milan side. And I could see him looking at me thinking, sorry, what do you mean? I said, well, obviously I work for the Liverpool Echo, but, I've been an Evertonian all my life, and I was there doing a professional job, but secretly rather hoping that, so your team would win that night. So we've met him a few times since, and yeah, he comes across great. So the players really appreciate him. Everybody at the club loves him. And it's just unfortunate that everything that he's trying to do is being interrupted by this so horrible business that's going on in the world. But so hopefully that'll be over sooner rather than later, and he can get on with the job properly.
Yeah, just finally on those daily meetings you used to have with the manager. So quickly, when did that stop? Was it when Moyes came in?
No, David was great. It wasn't quite as embracing as some of the other managers have been, in that, I'd only get a cup of tea, sort of once a week or twice a week, and be invited up to his room, because he's very intense, David, and he always used to turn up and straight into the job, straight into what he wanted to do with that day. So I'd try and arrange it so I would get to Belfield before he arrived. He normally got there about 8:15, depending on how his commute came from Preston down the M6. So I'd be there waiting for him, and then he'd always give me 5 or 10 minutes just in the little entrance hall at Belfield, alongside that radiator and the plaque that celebrates the opening of Belfield, which was fine. That was all I needed, just an opportunity to bounce a few questions off him. But no, he was very, very good in that respect. It changed, like I say, when Everton moved to Finch Farm, and I think they said then, look, we need to change this a little bit. We can't have you down here every single day. And I'd moved across the chief sports writing role then. I think it was Scott McLeod and Dominic King were taking over as the Everton writer, and they took the opportunity then to put us a little bit of a distance, maybe, so not quite as much as some of the other newspapers, but, so more so than we had been previously. And we had to accept that because, unfortunately, that was the nature of, journalism nowadays. So we had to do what we can to try and, get the stories that we could. And having said that, David was always available, so we had his number, we could ring him at any time. And like I said, he was always be 100% honest. So it wasn't so much an issue, really. It was when he went and Roberto came in, and, we had to try really hard then to try and embrace Roberto and get to know him, and we did. But like I say, could be an odd individual at times, Roberto. You weren't quite sure that what you were getting told by Roberto was the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Yeah, I mean, we spoke to Leon Osman a couple of years ago, and he sort of said the same sort of thing about Roberto. It was a case of he'd tell you in meetings and speak to you. They say you're a key part of my plans. You're going to be playing and all this sort of stuff. And Ozzy was saying he was effectively in his last season and knew that wasn't the case. He's like, why are you saying that to me? But just on the chat you used to have with the manager, obviously that would have been, it was fantastic for you guys at the Echo and doing your report and stuff like that. Did you feel as though it was helpful for the managers as well, for you to sort of relay what what people are saying and stuff like that? And maybe that's something now that would be helpful to someone like Carlo Ancelotti in particular, who's new to the football club. But you've got that link between the main local press and him, that's sort of transmitting that information back to him. It could be a major asset.
I've said this to people at Everton many times. It would be 100% because, apart from the access that we get and, so the quality of stories that we get, it allows you a very privileged insight into what's going on in the manager's mind. You see him every day, therefore you get to know him and you hear about things that he's trying to implement and things that he's trying to do. And it's a difficult balancing act. You've got to show a level of trust, and you'll hear things that you'll know he doesn't want publishing, and so you've got to try and respect that. Which I think we did. But equally, you get, like I say, a little knowledge of what, kind of things he's trying to do at the football club. And it just means that, when you have a bad result, for instance, or a bad run, you treat it a little bit differently because you realize what the manager was trying to do, so during that time, you can see things a little bit more clearly. And I'm thinking really, so during the Joe Royal era, when he had this incredible run where he started his Everton career, where an absolute miracle keeping Everton in the Premier League as it was.
Yeah.
And then, so winning the FA Cup. And I always remember a little anecdote of how we started, myself and Joe. I mean, I was at home one night and the phone goes at home. And he goes, so hello, pal, just letting you know that, we've sold David Burrows to West Ham, I think it was, Coventry, sorry, 1.1 million. I thought, oh, right, okay. And I didn't know him. I just presumed that he'd run around all the media. So I turn up for work the next day, pick up the morning papers, absolutely nothing in any of the papers. So he'd basically dropped an exclusive in my lap. So wrote the story, went down to see him. I said, oh, I really appreciate that. I thought you were ringing everybody. He goes, oh, no, son, I've got a catchphrase, support your local sheriff. And I thought, wonderful. And so, that was the start of a beautiful relationship. It was, so I love Joe to this day. And, so we got on very, very well as a result of, lots and lots of things. Came to my wedding, he's a really, really good guy. So that when he had that, really sticky run at the start of '97 in January, I was very supportive because I knew what he was trying to do. I knew the injury problems that he had. He'd lost Andy Hinchcliffe for a season. He'd lost Joe Parkinson, Dave Watson briefly. He was trying. He had a very, very thin squad anyway, which he'd inherited, and he was still trying to build that up. And so I could see all this. I could see what he was trying to do. I could see, the signings he was trying to bring in. And so that tempered what I was writing, and I was very, very supportive as a result. And I don't think that compromised me as a journalist because I still genuinely believe that if Everton had have kept Joe, so as manager, instead of this madness of mutually consenting him, the club would have been in a better place. We wouldn't have had that, sort of ridiculous situation where Peter Johnson thought he was getting one manager and didn't, had to hold on for another, and then ultimately ended up having to bring Howard back, so for a third time. So it was a very, very curious time, but equally, I could see what Joe was trying to do, which was why I was supportive. And I think that bringing it right up to the modern day, I think that, so if we were seeing the manager every single day, we would appreciate more, so what he's trying to achieve and what he's doing. And the manager starts to trust you a little bit more as well and starts to, so let you into his thinking and let you into his mindset. And so it tempers what you're writing, so if you're going to be particularly critical of a particular player, maybe you wouldn't be because you realise, so why he's been playing and why he's playing in the position that he is. Things like that, things that you probably wouldn't relate to a wider audience. Because when we do see the manager now, so we're down at Finch Farm, when you have all the press, all the national press of the Sky TV, the various television stations, the radio stations, it's basically everybody turning up in the same room. And the manager naturally is going to be a little bit more guarded, I think, than he would be in an environment where it's just one-to-one. So, I'll keep working on Everton. You never know. Maybe one day they'll sort of let us have something approaching, so what we had back in the day.
Yeah, and I suppose that's a really fascinating point about Joe and how you felt supportive of him, but you weren't compromised. And I suppose that's because you knew him and you knew what he was trying to do, and you knew what he was like as a fella in that regard. And something we were speaking about on one of our shows last week in regards to the current manager and his staff. Obviously, the club put an interview out with David Angelotti last week, and it was really interesting. He said a lot of really lovely things about the football club. He's clearly enjoying himself. And we sort of related that back to Marco Silva's time at the football club. Yeah. And I sort of asked everybody, does anyone remember what his assistant's name was? And nobody really knew, because it felt as though him and his coaching staff tried to be quite sheltered and tried to keep himself away from all that. And then ultimately, when things did go wrong, people didn't really have that affinity with him and that connection with him, because I don't know whether he didn't want to portray himself and let the fans get to know him, or his coaching staff, or the club just didn't do it. But one way or another, he just felt like a fella stood on the sidelines and not someone who we could relate to.
I think that was down to Marco himself, because, I met him quite a few times, and he was a very lovely, engaging guy. But he was very, very guarded. There was one lengthy sit-down that Brian Dugan, who was then the media officer at the club, had arranged for me. And as ever nowadays, it was controlled. He sat in on the interview and had to listen to everything I was asking. But, he wasn't trying to interrupt or trying to steer me in a certain direction. So it was, in effect, a general, sort of informal conversation. And I had about 45 minutes with him. And, he was good value. But every time I tried to steer him into something a little bit more intimate, he didn't want to know. even to the point, well, where are you living? You're bumping into Evertonians when you're walking around, wouldn't tell me, didn't want anybody to know anything about, the inner workings of his life, which is fine. So I understand how pressurised football management is and how managers maybe need to put a little bit of a drawbridge up. I mean, Ronald Koeman insisted on living in Cheshire, so he wouldn't be subjected to that kind of, sort of that scrutiny.
Yeah.
But you contrast that to Carlo, who's like going down to Bootlestan shopping centre, who's so bumping into fans on the waterfront and mixing with them. It's almost as if he's looked at his predecessors and thought, well, hang on, so the fans didn't appreciate that, they weren't happy with that, and he's not willing to make the same mistakes. He's actually putting himself out there. He's basically treating himself, as a fan, so mixing with the supporters, and that does make a big difference. Like you say, people can relate to them a little bit more. And when things aren't going quite so well, and let's face it, Everton's a project that needs rebuilding, so we need, so a lot of work going on there. So people are prepared to be a bit more patient because they see a man that actually shares the same values and shares the same, sort of feelings that they have. So yeah, very clever lad, Carlo. He is actually, so as you can imagine, the man who's had the career he's had doesn't come by accident, so he does it maybe because he's a very, very shrewd operator. But yeah, it definitely works, 100%.
Just before we wrap up, Dave, I wanted to speak about something else with you as well. I know you're massively into your boxing.
Yeah.
And I just want to see, have you seen the videos of Mike Tyson doing the rounds? Back in training again?
Oh, I saw something on Twitter this morning saying, Boxing News sent something out saying the worst aspect of nostalgia now is the possibility of Tyson coming back. And I just dismissed it. I'll look at that later. But that's genuinely a tale doing the rounds that he might be making a comeback of sorts.
There's been some videos. There's been some videos of him doing training, and he looks very sharp in them. But I suppose these videos of boxers, sometimes they're a bit speeded up and stuff like that when they're training. They're obviously not getting hit back or anything like that. But I think he put on one of his social media things a hint of a comeback or something like that. But the man's 52 years old now. I just wanted to see if you had any thoughts on it. But
it's exactly the same as the thoughts I had when Nigel Benn, so it was making his comeback, sort of last year. It's tragic, I suppose you can look at the fact that it was George Foreman won the world heavyweight title at 46, and you saw, Tommy Hearns kept going to a ripe old age. But boxing is the most brutally unforgiving sport, sort of imaginable out there. It's dangerous. I sat down having this conversation with Tony Bellew, many times, so towards the end of his career. I feared for him against David Hay. I really did, and it shows you what I know about boxing. But no, I genuinely did, because heavyweights, it just takes one punch, and it's not just so your fight ended, your life could be ended, and he totally got the risks inherent in it, but the rewards outweighed that. And having beaten David Hay once, I thought, great, that's it. You can now so call it a day as a heavyweight. But he saw the opportunity to make a lot more money in the rematch. And I said to him, why do you want to do this? You've got a wife, you've got kids, you've made money. And it's a drug sometimes, boxing. It gets into you, and it's very, very difficult to get away from it. And, so people just keep boxing far more than they should do. Muhammad Ali, my all-time idol, so in any sport, went on far longer than he ever should have done. And it was tragic what happened to him, so right in the end, the Larry Holmes fight with that horrible little tinny bell in the Bahamas. So legends don't know when to say no. And Mike Tyson is a legend, so I think ultimately his claims to be like the greatest boxer of all time, so were exposed, when Buster Douglas stood up to him, and then, when people realized that he was fallible. And, so if you did confront, the monster head on, so you could possibly, so get out of there, so with some kind of, something intact. But for 3 or 4 years, he was an absolute force of nature. And I remember the night he lost to James Buster Douglas, and it was in Japan. It was in the wee small hours, like 4 o'clock, and I hadn't stayed up to watch it. And a mate came round, so to the house. Oh, have you heard? So Tyson has lost. I refused to believe it. No, he's lost. Yeah, well, what did he lose? And thinking it might have been a flash knockout in the first round, 10th round knockout. And as soon as I heard 10th round, I thought, impossible. Tyson can't stop 10 rounds. And so that was what he was like, so the aura that surrounded the man back then, that was dented by that defeat and by the subsequent experiences that he had. And it's never going to come back now. So I don't know what he thinks he can possibly achieve by coming back. It'll be a circus show. It'll be a freak show. And I'd rather not see it, to be honest. I didn't want to see Nigel Benn get back into a ring again, and I certainly don't want to see Mike Tyson get back in.
I mean, there's been a talk. There's been talk about a few boxers maybe coming back during all this, the lockdown and stuff like that. And you just wonder with financial constraints and with them being home and doing home training and that sort of thing, and being in that bubble, that we might see a few of that sort of comeback when this all ends. And like you said, it's just a bit horrible, isn't it, just to see someone like that go through it again.
Well, you've got memories, so you remember, so how these people were. Funny enough, I got a message yesterday on Facebook Messenger from a fellow called Glenn Feldman, who was, he still is a very, very highly respected judge. He's done the Fury Wilder fights. He's done or he's done Mayweather, God knows how many times. So a really regarded, judge. But I got to know him when he did Shane Erie, Andy Holligan, way back in the day when he did The Narc in the Park in '96, I think it was. And that was an absolutely incredible contest, so 6 rounds of absolute intensity, akin with Hagler Hearns, really it was. It was absolutely wonderful. And doesn't quite get the profile it deserves because it was a domestic fight, effectively, rather than an international fight. Remember the BBC at the time, so their radio guys, John Rawlings was it, basically screaming down the phone to his bosses, please don't undersell this. This is an incredible fight. And at the end of the contest, Glenn Feldman turned round to where the press bench was, and I won't do the American accent because I can't, but he just drawled, that is the greatest fight I've ever seen. Anyway, so I used that in my piece, and he read it, and he was quite pleased about it, and I just kept in touch. So sadly, the upshot, he became a Liverpool fan as a result of his visit to Merseyside. Follows Liverpool Football Club, but he keeps in touch, and does all these great fights. But you have memories of these fights and these fighters, so as they were. I mean, one of the greatest nights at Goodison will be Tony Bellew winning the world title against Ilunga Makabu. That was an incredible night, helped by the fact that the weather was perfect, everything about it was great. But another little, so tick in, so Goodison's, so long and storied history. But these are memories, and memories can be sullied and can be spoiled by things that happen subsequently. I'd rather nothing happen to sully the memory of Mike Tyson. He's got enough skeletons in his closet without adding any more to it.
Yeah, that's a brilliant note to finish on. Dave, we'll wrap it up there. It's been a pleasure speaking to you. Half an hour has absolutely flown by.
Enjoyed it.
Be great to get you back on to chat about your book when that inevitably gets going again. We'll go into a bit more detail on that.
Nice one, give us a shout anytime.
In the meantime, thanks to everybody for watching this. If you enjoyed this video, go back and watch the rest of the ones we've done. Yesterday spoke to former England international Sue Smith, who a lot of people think is a red. Did you know she was a blue, Dave?
No, I watched that yesterday, actually. No, I had no idea. You've educated me there. It was very good, though. Yeah, I urge people to watch that one as well.
She said to me after we recorded that people come up to her in the supermarket and start talking about Liverpool, thinking she's a red. She's like, no, I'm a blue. So,
what a cross to bear that is.
I spoke to Kevin Ratcliffe last week as well. One more video coming up this week on Friday. I speak to Andy Burnham, Manchester Mayor, a big Evertonian as well. So watch out for that tomorrow. But thanks very much to Dave, and I'll speak to you soon.